We're hearing this word a lot these days.
We are back now with breaking news. A December inflation report just out this morning.
The annual inflation rate.
In a wholesale inflation report that will probably keep the inflation.
Inflation in the U.S. is now at 6.5%.
Inflation is slowly but steadily cooling off.
People are talking about inflation, but why?
Well, allow me to explain. My name is Thomas Reilly. I'm a financial advisor with Strategic Wealth Designers. And this is inflation simply explained in less than 5 minutes. So what is inflation? Simply put, inflation is the rate of increase in prices for services and goods. For example, let's say you bought a jacket for $100 a year ago, and the inflation rate today is around 5%. That means that same jacket today costs you about $105. Now, is the inflation rate always 5%? Of course not. Over the course of 100 years, just like the market, the inflation rate has gone up and it's gone down depending on how the economy is. The average inflation rate in the US since the 1900s has been around 3.3%. However, in 2022, the inflation rate got as high as 9%. Now, 9% doesn't seem that high, but when you consider the inflation didn't get higher than 3% during a 9-year period from 2012 to 2020, it makes you wonder, why is it so high? Well, to answer that, we first have to talk about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is a central bank of the United States. In simpler terms, it's like a piggy bank for the US. Their job is to make sure there's always enough money for people to use, and they're the ones in charge of setting interest rates as well as controlling how much money is circulating in the US economy. During the 2020 COVID pandemic, there is no money circulating around. Why? Because everyone was at home, not spending their money. Because of that, the Fed decided, hey, let's stimulate the economy. So they printed a lot of money and gave a lot of people stimulus checks. Not only did they do that, they also lowered interest rate. And when we lowered interest rate, it makes it cheaper for everyone to borrow money. This starts a little bit of a domino effect. Once borrowing money was cheaper, that means it's easier to buy things. And if it's easier to buy things, that means people are willing to pay more for stuff that they want to buy. And if people are willing to pay more for things, that means it's easier for businesses to price things higher, thus creating inflation. So now that you have a basic idea of what causes inflation, we go back to the important question, why should you care? Well, the inflation rate affects how you are able to spend your money. Let's look at this graph here. This black line is going to represent your living expenses. This blue line is going to represent your salary. Now, if the inflation rate continues at its current pace or gets higher, then your living expenses will be this red line here, where eventually your salary won't actually cover your living expenses. This only occurs if the inflation rate goes higher than 6%. If it goes back down to normal levels, let's say 3%, then that's a good thing. Normal inflation is good because it shows that the economy is growing, and that can only happen if the domino effect that we talked about earlier reverses its course, which means that the Fed raises interest rates, which makes it harder to borrow money. And if it's harder to borrow money, then people won't be willing to spend more. And if people aren't spending as much, then businesses are forced to lower the prices, resulting in the inflation rate becoming lower. So now what should you do if the inflation rate stays or goes higher? Or what if it goes back down to normal levels? Well, we have two different options. If the inflation rate starts to lower back down to say around 3%, here are two things you need to do. One, you need to have an emergency fund and try to exhaust all of your options before withdrawing from this emergency fund. Two, since your salary shouldn't be outpaced by inflation, that means you'll have more opportunities to invest and possibly build your wealth. If the opposite happens and inflation rate is at 6% or higher, here are three things you need to do. One, have an emergency fund, but this time you're more inclined to use it since there's a good chance you might have exhausted all of your other options already. Two, talk to your employer about possibly getting an inflationary raise. This is becoming more common in the workplace, as it should, especially with the rates as high as they are. Lastly, it may not hurt to find other streams of income to help supplement your salary. There are hundreds of side hustle opportunities out there, and even if inflation starts to go down, having extra income never hurts. All right, so that's inflation simply explained. If you guys want to see other topics where we break down financial concepts to make it easier to understand, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if there are any other things you want us to break down, please leave us a comment and we'll be happy to do so.